of the New York State Legislative Commission on the Future of the Long Island Power Authority. My name is Rory Lantzman. I'm the Executive Director of the Commission, and I want to welcome everyone here today. I will just lay out a few ground rules and then turn it over to our co-chairs to kick off the hearing. We're going to hear from a collection of legislators, advocates, members of the public. We have an order that we're going to start with. If you would like to speak and you haven't signed up yet outside, please do so. We're asking everyone to limit their testimony to 5 minutes maximum, and that will give everyone an opportunity to speak and also the commissioners an opportunity to ask questions. This hearing is being live streamed, and so in addition to the folks in this room, I'm certain that there are thousands of viewers across Long Island and the country riveted by this testimony. But this is a very important part of our process, and we thank you all very much for being here. With that, let me turn it over to our co-chairs, Assemblymember Fred Thiel and Senator Kevin Thomas.
Thank you, Rory. And first, let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Thanks. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. And thank you, Rory, for giving the ground rules so far. My name's Fred Thiel. I am one of the co-chairs of the LIPA Commission, and Senator Kevin Thomas, who will speak in a few minutes, is my co-chair on the Senate side. This is a room that is extremely familiar to me because I was the Southampton Town Supervisor for more than 3 years and got to sit here every Friday and every Tuesday. And my hands started shaking. I broke out in a sweat, but it was PTSD, I think. But it's great to be back here. I want to thank all of the members of the town board that are here. Supervisor Schneiderman, thank you. Councilman Bouvier for really helping us set this up. Councilman Martell, I see. Am I missing anybody from the town board? Tommy John Scavone, Councilman Scavone. So you have a quorum if you need to conduct any business later in the day today. So I'm just going to give some really brief overview remarks to kind of explain what this commission is all about and what we hope to accomplish today and certainly ultimately accomplish with the commission. You know, the history of LIPA starts in the mid-1980s. I promise you I'm not going to go through the entire history of the Long Island Power Authority. But, you know, suffice it to say that when LIPA was created by the state legislature back in the mid-1980s, the sponsors then were State Assemblyman Paul Harrenberg and State Senator Jim Lack many, many years ago. The statute for LIPA had two purposes. One of those purposes was to close the Shoreham nuclear power plant, which it did. Maybe not to the way all of us would have liked to have seen it closed as far as how the burden, the financial burden got assessed, but that was one of the purposes, and that was accomplished. The second purpose of that statute, if you go back and read the legislative findings, was to replace LILCO, what was then our private utility company, LILCO, the Long Island Lighting Company, with a full public authority. That never happened. That has never happened. Ultimately, LIPA did replace LILCO, but never was a full public power authority. It has always been governed by a third-party manager, and there's been different managers through the years. There's been Keyspan, there's been National Grid, and now there's PSE&G Long Island. It is the only third-party manager system in the country. There are private utilities, there are public utilities, there are no third-party management utilities in the country. And I suspect, based on our experience, that there's a reason for that, why nobody else has decided to do it this way. So public power has never been given a fair and full chance with LIPA, even though that was the original intent of the legislation. So I don't have to tell you, because you're all Long Islanders, you know the failures that we've seen with the third-party manager system, particularly when it comes to storm response. And what really triggered the creation of this commission was the failures that occurred with Tropical Storm Isaias back in 2020. It was a tropical storm, not a hurricane, not a superstorm, a tropical storm. And as a result, almost 500,000 customers went out. But the bigger problem was that communications went out, and storm response was virtually crippled by that. And that is really what triggered among members of the legislature to look at alternatives to this third-party manager system, and to go back and look at the original intent of the legislation, which was public power. And that is what this commission is to look at, to see if we can come up with a workable public power model to make recommendations to the legislature. Our process for this was, with the creation of the commission, was first to have public hearings. There'll be a draft report after this. Then there'll be a second round of public hearings to review the draft report. And then we are to report with a final report to the legislature by April 1st of this year. So it's a tight time frame, a lot of work to be done, but a critical part of this is certainly getting public input. And we've had hearings, as Rory said, this is our 5th hearing. We had a hearing, it's the Long Island Power Authority, but the service area is Suffolk, Nassau, and the Rockaways in Queens. And I'll introduce our members. We have one of our members of the commission is here from Queens. So we've had a hearing in Queens, we've had a hearing in Nassau, we've had a hearing in Suffolk, and we've had a virtual hearing so people could participate virtually. But both Senator Palumbo and I felt that representing the East End, as we all know, it's hard to be on the East End and to get to Hauppauge or to get to Mineola, and certainly to get to the Rockaways, as I found out when we had the hearing there. It's called Far Rockaway for a reason. And we all learned that, but a beautiful part of the state. So we're here to listen to the public. I'll introduce the members on the Assembly side, and when Senator Thomas speaks, he can introduce his members. But Assembly Member Stacey Pfeffer Amato from the Rockaways, from the Queens part of the service area, is a member of the commission, and Doug Smith from Suffolk County, also a member of the commission. We have one vacancy on the Assembly side that we will be filling shortly, and there's also one on the Senate, the consequence of elections. Before we turn it over to the public, I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair, State Senator Kevin Thomas, who it has been just a pleasure to work with as we've done the work of this commission.
Thank you, and good morning, Southampton. One of the bad things of going second is that Assembly member and the former supervisor said everything that I needed to say. All right, starting with the history of LIPA to where we are today. And I thank him for his leadership. He has been in the middle of this far longer than I have. As the chair of the Consumer Protection Committee, my committee has oversight over the welfare of New Yorkers in this state. And I'm joined by Senator Palumbo as well, who is the minority member in the minority chair of the Judiciary. And we're doing a lot to protect New Yorkers, and LIPA and PSEG and everything that they do here, we need to look at and see what we can do better, because we deserve better. We pay more taxes than anyone else in the state. We deserve better than what we get. So that being said, I'm looking forward to the testimony today, and thank you for opening up this lovely venue for us to do this hearing as well.
Thank you, Senator. We're in your district too, Mr. Palumbo. So, Senator, I want to just give you a chance if you want to say a
Sure,
few
just
words.
want to welcome our colleagues from both houses, and as the Assemblyman Chairman Thiel and I say, first district first, right? My predecessor said that probably 10,000 times in his career, but we look forward to the testimony and to keep moving the ball forward and to try and get the best possible plan. And as you've all seen, it's kind of sausage making generally, a lot of this, but it's a process. And so we're trying to get all the stakeholders involved so we can have a global view to do what we think is certainly going to be best. And the difference, as we've said before, with this commission, this isn't a study commission. This isn't a group of people who are going to issue a report and say, we think you should do that. We're all members of the legislature. We have the power of the pen to actually enact legislation and make those changes. So that's what I think is very unique about this. And I commend Chairman Thomas and Chairman Thiel for putting a commission together like this, where it's just not a bunch of studies, hemming and hawing, dog and pony shows, and someone says, you should think about doing this. We're going to be a commission of action, and that's how it should be. So I just appreciate the opportunity, but thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And on that note, we're going to start to hear from the public. So, Rory?
Yep, good. Let's have Assemblymember Jody Giglio as our first witness. After her will be Bridget Fleming, and then Laverne Tenenberg. Assemblymember?
Good morning, and I want to thank Senator Thomas and Assemblyman Thiel for coming up with this commission, and you're all qualified and competent representatives of the state. So I want to thank you all for being here and from hearing from the public, the ratepayers, about their suffering, not only in these economic times, but that the rates keep going up. So, you know, the ratepayers expect a resilient, reliable energy system. And the state has put lofty goals in place to meet the renewable energy quotes, and they've told the utility companies, you have to meet these goals by this time frame. And it keeps changing. It's a living time frame for them to meet the renewables, but there's a lot of pushback in the public for the renewable locations, for the solar panels, for the wind turbines, for the battery storage, especially now that we have all of these solar arrays in place. So something needs to be done to be more transparent about the process in where these systems occur. And when the state put the 22 megawatt power out of local jurisdiction and gave it to the state to determine where these solar arrays should go was really problematic, because the town could only make recommendations or the local governments could only make recommendations. They couldn't, and they were considered or they weren't. But that's a concern of mine with the renewable energy and the state's expectations of the utility companies. Investment in existing infrastructure. We've seen many storms where we've seen power outages for long periods of time, and we did great things in legislation this year in telling the utility companies, if you're not responding right away, then you're going to pay every ratepayer in order to make up for their loss of power and to, you know, refill their refrigerators, or to pay them back for what they lost in their refrigerators or what they lost due to the damage of being without power for as long as some people were. So, like I said, we've done some good things on the state level, especially making sure that the utility companies get the EMS, the fire, police, and ambulance services up and running immediately. So that was a good thing. So I commend you all for putting that together and for putting that legislation forward and making sure it happened. Just as we have a tax cap in the state of New York, I think we should have a rate cap, so that the utility companies cannot keep going back to the PSC and asking for more. And when they anticipate that it's going to be a slight rate increase, it always ends up being more of an increase than what they had originally anticipated. And that has to do with expenses, which brings me to my next point of when a utility company is proposing expenses, whether it be for infrastructure that's already in place or for the renewable energy goals, that there be a separate line item on the tax bill, on the rate bill, so that the ratepayers know exactly how much money they're spending in investment in existing infrastructure and how much money they're spending in renewable energy. Because renewable energy comes with a great cost. It's a good goal. It's a good direction to go in. but the ratepayers should know exactly how much of their bill is going towards that. There are a lot of programs in the state for eligible ratepayers that can't afford to pay their full utility bill. But it's getting harder and harder for Long Islanders to pay their utility bills. And if you're not within the income bracket, then you're not eligible for rate relief. So I think that the separate line item on the utility bills, I think the advisory council, Mr. Thiel, Assemblyman Thiel, I read your Bill of Rights. I think it's fantastic. And I think that's all the reason why this commission should put in the advisory council in place. And before any rate increase is proposed, that it goes before the advisory council, before it goes to the PSC. So that we make sure that the rates that they're proposing, that they're kept within that line. So, and that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for having these hearings today, and appreciate all of you and enjoy working with you. So,
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Assemblymember Giglio. And I remind people now that Assemblymember Giglio and I now share the town of Southampton in the New York State Assembly. And I thought that your point with regard to rate review is extremely important. At one of the other hearings, we talked about the fact that there's a threshold percentage, which escapes me for the minute. I don't know if it's 2% or 3%, something like that. But if you keep it under that threshold, there's never a full rate review, and the public never gets a chance to be heard. And I think that goes to the transparency argument that you made. Does anybody have any questions for Assemblymember Giglio? Not? Thank you very much, Joe.
thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Suffolk County Legislator Bridget Fleming.
Good morning, Chairman Thomas, Chairman Thiel, and members of the Commission. I'm Bridget Fleming, Suffolk County Legislator for the 2nd Legislative District. I've distributed full copies of my statements. I'll make it a little shorter to meet the time limit. Thank you for the opportunity to provide input into the important work of this Commission. There's a refreshing level of commitment to public stakeholder input into the reform of our electric utility that's been demonstrated by the creation of the Commission and by your work to date. It's good to see, particularly in light of LIPA's inexplicable decision to halt the recent options analysis midstream and to renew the PSEG contract despite all its management failures and attempts to evade accountability. It's clearly time to move away from the third-party management structure. It's time to decouple our utility from the constraints of its unique history and instead bring it in line with best practices for utilities across the country and around the globe. There's a reason we are the only utility service territory in the country with this governance structure. Its management has failed the 1.2 million customers of LIPA on Long Island and Queens. On Long Island, it's an ongoing challenge to maintain the fabric of our communities and to keep young working people and innovative companies here in the region. To ensure a sustainable economy, we must tackle the high cost of doing business, including electric costs, which are higher than in most parts of the country. We're also a coastal community, particularly vulnerable to increasing impacts of climate change. We must move forward with innovative and cost-effective electricity production and transmission, not backward with a governance structure that has left Long Islanders in the dark. The Suffolk County Legislature recently assisted in launching a Long Island solar map, produced a community choice aggregation task force report, which was filed in proceedings of the DPS, and additional programs. Bid packets are due next week on the 3rd round of awards for major ocean wind projects, which will continue to cement Long Island's place in the history of global renewable energy supply. These are only examples of initiatives being explored by governments and private industry across Long Island that demonstrate the public's heightened concern for reliable, cost-effective electric power that will reduce fossil fuel emissions and have the potential of providing electricity that is less tied to rate pressure created by the commodity markets. At the same time, billions of dollars in support for forward-thinking projects is soon going to be available to our region for infrastructure, to build the economy, advance science, and reduce and mitigate climate change impacts. it's critically important that we complete reform of the governance of our electric utility to ensure competent and effective implementation of innovative projects to take Long Island into the future, where we can not only protect our community from the ravages of climate change impacts, but where we can become a model for the world by meeting the aggressive targets of the CLCPA. Implementing a truly public power entity promises to achieve important goals that have evaded Long Island ratepayers under the third-party management structure. LIPA has confirmed that moving to a public utility will save as much as $75 million. Also, critically important, the new structure must provide responsive, transparent communications with local stakeholders. This can be achieved by ensuring that governance of the utility is based here on Long Island, with a governing body that is elected and accountable primarily to Long Islanders. In addition, local oversight with the authority to demand transparency, accountability, and corrective action must be provided. I applaud the creation of the advisory committee with its thorough and inclusive roster. I urge that certain aspects of the current governance be maintained. It's critical that the structure of the utility enable eligibility for FEMA and other federal and local government grant funding, allow for tax-exempt debt, and remain free from the need to provide dividends. It's important to stay on track with the current gradual reduction of the legacy debt. And in addition, workers throughout the system must be protected in the transition, with particular attention to honoring workers' expectations regarding wages and working conditions, and maintain bargained for pension and benefit plans. Thank you for your care and clear commitment as you pursue this important task. Under your guidance, LIPA really does have the potential to move away from the status quo and join utilities across the country in deploying a forward-thinking, reliable, and responsive public utility. Thank you very much, and I'm happy
Thank you,
to take
Bridget.
questions.
A couple of questions. I'll start off with some questions. I'm probably going to ask a lot of the witnesses this question today, and certainly in your role, I'm going to ask you this question. It seems to me the type of utility that you get and the priorities that get set, a lot of it is determined by the form of governance that you have. And when LIPA was first created in the mid-1990s, the Board of Trustees was originally supposed to be elected, an elected board, elected by the people of Long Island. Got postponed, ultimately got eliminated, and we have the system we have now, which is an appointed board where the governor appoints the majority of the members, and the Senate, I think, gets 2 appointments, and the Assembly gets 2 appointments. But all the appointments are made by elected officials from Albany that, at the current moment, don't live on Long Island, which I have always found to be part of the problem, is the form of governance. At prior hearings, we've heard differing ideas. We've heard from other public power companies and different models, some of the research that's been done. Elected boards, appointed by local officials in the service area. Some of them have been hybrid models. My question is really, do you have any feeling about what governance for a public LIPA should look like?
Well, you'd love that elections were perfect and, would work to get the very best and most responsive to the community folks in office. I'm not sure that always works at any level of government. So while that might be ideal, I don't know that would be perfect. At the same time, selection, obviously, by anyone who's not responsive to the public has its own shortfalls. I think the two things, so I can't tell you, I've heard very good discussions in your previous hearings about the pros and cons of the various ways of providing for a board of trustees or a governing body. I would only caution, as I'm sure you're all very aware from the comments I've heard, that out-of-town authorities are not effective, that for instance, the Department of Public Service not having authority to require corrective actions or have transparent discussions with the utility is very problematic. So I would only say that it's got to be local. There has to be some sort of local tie. And that we need to ensure that there is some kind of real transparency with the local folks. I think that the advisory committee is a very good step in that it really demonstrates that the commission and the creators of the legislation understand the importance of that local, diverse, inclusive input when decisions are being made. I think the DPS tried to have some local control. Unfortunately, because of the limits on their authority, it's less effective than we'd like it to be.
Second, you mentioned the folks that are on the ground, the union workers that basically maintain and run the system for us. And through all the testimony we've had and among the commission members, there's universal agreement with what you had to say, and that is the rights and what has been earned by the workers on the ground need to be protected, and that's certainly something that we're mindful of. And we say this at almost every hearing, but the complaints that people have with LIPA and that they have with PSE&G Long Island, it's with the management that the problems are. And I think Long Islanders are very happy with the workforce that executes on a daily basis and provides for the reliability of the system. I've said this many times, but I'll say it again here today, and that is, as an elected official, whether it was particularly Superstorm Sandy, we'd have these telephone calls with the executives of the utility. At that point, it was National Grid. During ICAS, it was PSE&G Long Island. I never learned anything from those calls. I would how I found out what was going on is I would go to the local substation and talk to the guy or the woman who was running the substation, who he would tell me what was going on. And that's how you would find out, hey, when's the power coming on? Where are the problems? And so I just wanted to highlight again, as we always do, that this is not about the workforce that serves Long Island, it's about management. My last question for you, because I know you...
May I just make a
Sure.
comment on that? I mean, I think that I agree with you 100%. I think it's critically important to just focus also on the fact that the very management failures actually expose the workers to issues that they shouldn't have had to deal with. Isaias and the response to Isaias was a very good example of that, where customers had no answers. Customers could not get communication with regard to when their lights were going back on, and the workers are in the field doing their very best. It's the management failures that expose those workers to the inability to respond to those folks, and also to try to, sort of tie together a system that wasn't communicating. So no question about it, the pension funds in these bargaining units have bargained for need to be protected, because even though you might have great pension funds in different bargaining units, they may not be exactly co-terminus, in terms of their terms. So that is something that's going to have to be tackled, and I would suggest labor management experts or an expert be part of the effort at the table to ensure that those benefit plans match up.
One last question, because I know you were involved with this on the county level, and that's with community choice aggregation, which we're going to have other speakers I see on the list that I have no doubt are going to talk about that. But this is certainly a program that other parts of the state have been able to take advantage of. It's been particularly difficult on Long Island, and I think part of the existing LIPA structure is part of that. I'd just like to get maybe some further comments on what your experience was in trying to bring the benefits of that program to your constituents.
Well, one thing that we've seen is here on the ground under the current LIPA structure, is that members of the community do not have the choices they'd like to be able to exercise in terms of how their power is being produced, especially those who are concerned about climate change impacts. And so community choice aggregation offers one, not the only, but one way to open up those choices for community members. It's been extraordinarily frustrating to to work with LIPA and PSEG on this, despite the folks who are trying to be helpful in DPS and elsewhere in PSEG and LIPA. The bottom line is there was actually a poison pill kind of inserted that made it too expensive to do the job, and certainly protected the LIPA programs from any kind of competition from CCA or other choice models. We are a big island. We are vulnerable to climate change. We've got to allow customers of the utility an opportunity to come up with innovative solutions that they're willing to pay for that are going to save our planet.
Okay. Any other questions?
Senator Palumbo.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to follow up, I guess we're all kind of getting loose now, so we were asking you all these questions, right? That we're like,
Bring it
okay,
on.
we stopped looking at the wallpaper, now we're ready to roll. Just as a follow-up on the overall board system, because I just thinking about the dynamics of even my Senate district, from Stony Brook to Montauk, that Far Rockaway, and Stacy stepped out for a second, might as well be Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. So what do you think about like a ward system for someone who's been in public office, obviously? What do you think about maybe having almost like districts as they move out and have maybe a group that's elected or appointed? Because obviously local control, I think, is important, that they ultimately will know their districts better. Someone from Southampton will know the South Fork better than someone from Mineola.
I think it's an excellent thing to consider, and you see in various communities, various towns, varying levels of commitment to different kinds of innovation, to different environmental protections, to different ways to try to reduce climate change impacts. Other communities need to be much more focused on, for instance, ensuring social justice in the provision of electric power and responsiveness. And other communities need to protect themselves from projects that are going to invade their communities and interrupt equanimity when it comes to environmental justice. So I think you're absolutely right that different communities have different needs and concerns, and it might be a really good thing to approach. I wanted to just mention also with regard to your question, Assemblyman Thiel, on the governance. The other thing to look at, and I know you are, is models that work across the country, because there are models that work very well across the country, and I'm certain that you will be looking at those. But that may be the answer, is to find the ones that work. Let's do it that way.
With the elections also, there is, at least in prior hearings, there was the feeling these should be nonpartisan elections. It's not just do you elect them, it's how do you elect them and when do you elect them. And I think those are things we're going to need to look at also.
I would only caution that even the most local elections have become very toxic.
Okay. Other questions?
So actually, this dovetails perfectly, because I wonder, and this has come up. Actually, I think you testified at a previous thing in Brookhaven a few years ago, and I was.
We've been at this a while.
Yeah, that's right. No, yeah, and actually, I'm happy that we're sitting here for this venue, because a lot of us had questions that actually were more appropriate for kind of this style. Do you think, we're talking about a ward system? I envision we actually already have one of those set up, and you're representing one of those districts as a county legislator. Do you think there could potentially be a role for the Nassau-Suffolk county legislatures, and maybe the council member elected from the Rockaways, to not reinvent the wheel, but perhaps, again, there's so many ways to go at this, but at least in a situation like that, your district well, you've represented it. It doesn't take out the nonpartisan part, but any thoughts on that?
Well, what might be a little bit responsive to what you're saying is allowing for county legislators or local town boards to offer members of the group. I would just caution that certain people have certain focuses, and a county legislator, as you all know, has many, many things to focus on, and something as arcane as a third-party management system of LIPA and DPS takes an awful lot of time to figure out and be on top of. So just to say that the legislature should be part of the system, I think would be less effective than making sure that the legislature, for instance, passes a resolution which appoints someone to the board who is knowledgeable, and that it might be articulated in the resolution that you need a certain level of knowledge to try to wade through this complex stuff.
So then, to dovetail on that, as a member of the legislature under two different majorities, how do you tackle that? You know, if that is a consideration.
Did you have to remind me of that?
No, oh no, I wasn't trying to. Well, I'm in the minority of the assembly. I don't think we're going anywhere anytime soon. So that being said, you know, is there any thought on that? Because again, you want continuity, but you also want something that's nonpartisan. So if the legislature were involved, one year the priority could be different to the next year. You know, how do you, you know, is there a way to tackle that? Maybe that's too. broad a
No, I
question.
appreciate the desire for continuity, but I think you know, substantive input is probably more important than continuity, especially in this sector of the economy where innovation is such a critical part. You really got to be able to zig and zag and move and understand what the different you know, conditions are and what the different innovative technologies are and what's happening in the markets to be able to put it all together. So I would look more for substantive understanding than continuity.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I had a question, one last one. All of us here agreed this whole third-party management system does not work. Do you think LIPA can handle what PSEG has been doing so far?
Well, I mean, we've heard from Mr. Falcone that, you know, you have 19 managers that come along with the PSEG contract, and that you're going to have to replace that management structure to get the job done. So that's your job. I think that is something that's definitely, I mean, it will, cutting ties with PSEG or any third-party manager is going to cut considerable management resources out of the entity, and that's got to be replaced. And that's really the main question right now, is retaining the good parts, you know, that I outlined in my statement of what we're doing, but really taking a hard look at what we're paying for with those 19 managers who have been unresponsive, you know, not present in our local communities and not protecting or allowing for innovation. So all of those things need to be packed into your management structure, but you're going to have to replace the management.
So, I mean, right now, I believe we pay PSEG, what, $80 million a year?
I think it's 100.
It's over 100. It's 80.
80 or
Oh, how
82,
is that?
something like that.
Well, thank you.
Lisa says 80.
82.
I trust her.
So do you believe if we shift it and we end that, there isn't going to be like a startup cost?
Yes, there will certainly be a startup cost. I think Director Falcone said it was 20 to 30 million, which is going to, you know, that'll cut into your 75 to 80 million dollar savings in the first year. But he said that that wasn't an ongoing cost, and I trust that those numbers seem solid.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Right.
Appreciate
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank
Bridget,
you for
thank
what
you
you're
very
doing.
much.
No, I appreciate it.
And the management that refuses to give up their salaries. Like I said last time, it's like trying to get Donald Trump's tax return.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Laverne Tenenberg, the chair of the board of the assessors of
The
Suffolk.
town of Riverhead.
Oh,
Town of Riverhead.
town of Riverhead. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, members of the commission. Yes, my name is Laverne Tenenberg. I am an elected assessor for the town of Riverhead. I offer my testimony today to give you my perspective as it relates to the Long Island Power Authority and property taxes and payments in lieu of taxes, or pilots. In 2013, the New York State Legislature passed the LIPA Reform Act. I note that Assemblyman Fred Thiel did not vote for this legislation. In fact, I have met.
Best no vote I ever cast.
In fact, I have met with Assemblyman Thiel, Senator Ken Laval, now retired, and our former Assemblyman, now Senator Anthony Palumbo, to discuss my concerns with the act. The LIPA Reform Act did, among other things, amend 1020Q of the Public Authorities Law by providing, quote, that for the calendar year starting on January 1st, 2015, and for each calendar year thereafter, such payments in lieu of taxes shall not exceed the in lieu tax payments made to such municipalities and school districts in the immediately preceding year by more than 2%, end quote. One justification for the LIPA Reform Act was, quote, LIPA pays a franchise tax of about $26 million per year to the state based on gross receipts, despite the fact that a provision of the tax law requiring investor-owned utilities to pay the same tax was repealed in 2000. Additionally, a review of LIPA's annual budget shows that pilots assessed by municipalities with respect to LIPA's T&D related properties are growing at a rapid rate. Both the gross receipts tax paid to the state and the pilots assessed by municipalities are passed on directly to LIPA's customers and paid as a part of the utility bill. To reduce the effect of these taxes, the bill would eliminate entirely the gross receipts tax imposed by the state, and starting in calendar year 2015, cap the property-related pilots at 2% per year, end quote. LIPA owns real properties which are subject to pilot payments. Some of those real properties are called special franchise, which are poles, wires, and conduits in the public right-of-way. The state of New York is tasked with valuing these special franchise properties, not the local assessor, and are valued on a cost basis of reproduction costs new less depreciation. After Superstorm Sandy in 2012, LIPA was given $729 million from FEMA to harden its infrastructure. Since the special franchise properties had increased in value due to improvements, the assessments of the special franchise properties were increased by New York State. However, according to the LIPA Reform Act, LIPA would not pay them more than 2% of a prior year's payment. No other property owner that I am aware of has the same benefits as has been afforded to LIPA. None. How is that fair and equitable to Long Island taxpayers, to your constituents? If one were to add a $500,000 addition to their $1 million home, they would have to pay full taxes on the increase in value, but LIPA does not. Again, I ask you, how is that fair? Newsday reported on June 20th, 2022, that Chief Executive Tom Falcone stated that LIPA's assets, including substations, transmission lines, and poles, have increased in value from about $4 billion to around $10 billion since its takeover from Lilco. However, LIPA does not have to pay based on value. With regard to Riverhead's billing methodology to collect pilot payments, LIPA's Chief Executive Tom Falcone continues to send letters to the taxing jurisdictions in the town of Riverhead, reciting that the town's invoice and collection and distribution method fails to include all taxing jurisdictions within the town. Therefore, the amounts owed for pilot payments remain unpaid and in arrears. There is nothing in public authorities law that dictates how pilots are to be billed or collected. 1020Q of the public authority law states that, quote, the authority shall make payments in lieu of taxes to municipalities and school districts, end quote. LIPA refuses to make these payments to school districts and other taxing jurisdictions. LIPA, in its letters to the taxing jurisdictions, stated, quote, that it believes that the town of Riverhead receiver of taxes is responsible for the coordination of pilot invoices and the collection and distribution of LIPA's payments for all the amounts owed to the various taxing jurisdictions for each parcel in a similar manner as it does for property taxes for each parcel, unquote. This is a falsehood. The receiver of taxes may only collect property taxes as permitted in the tax warrant as approved by Suffolk County. The receiver of taxes, has no statutory authority to collect pilot payments. Pilots are not part of the tax warrant. LIPA has engaged in lawsuits with the 10 towns and the county that are still ongoing, and I would defer to our town attorney to elaborate further should you need edification. I believe that the LIPA Reform Act needs reforming, as does the public authorities law needs amending as follows. 1, exclude the value of special franchise properties from the 2% cap on pilots, and 2, tighten up the language in 1020Q of the public authorities law to specify the precise methodology for the billing and collection of pilot payments. Thank you for holding this hearing, and thank you for the opportunity to speak before you.
Thank you, Laverne, and we have, as you said, have had discussions about this. We've actually had developed some legislation with regard to this, which thus far has not moved forward, but from hearing from you and I think from the town of Brookhaven also, there may be the need for, maybe updating and changing some of the language for that proposal. So, I reached out to Rich DeBraga in Brookhaven,
Sure.
and certainly will with you also, to see if we can put together some legislation that just makes sure that LIPA pays their fair share. As you said, when you exclude, the increase in values that occur, I mean, that as you say, no other taxpayer has that benefit. So I look forward to working with you on that. That may be something, either freestanding legislation or maybe it's something we can incorporate with the recommendations we're making here, because we're recommending legislative changes,
Right.
to the LIPA Reform Act. But it's something that we'll continue to follow up
Sure.
on.
Great.
And it's good to see you today.
Good to see you too.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Other questions? No,
Okay?
Thanks, Laverne.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next three speakers, Councilman Scavone, if you desire to speak, you're welcome to come up. And after the councilman, we will have Lynn Arthur and Mike Gordon. So please be ready.
Good morning, everyone, and I want to thank the Legislative Commission on the future of the Long Island Power Authority for coming out here to Southampton Town. Yeah, when you drove out, highways did end, so welcome. And you know, I'm a lifelong East Ender of Long Island, born and raised here, and in the '80s, as a college kid, I remember the Shoreham controversy. I circulated petitions, signed petitions, and really opposed the construction of the Shoreham nuclear power plant. And one of our greatest concerns at that time was the management structure, Lilco. And so our concern, or one of the concerns, was that Lilco would actually be managing this thing, and that just scared the heck out of us. So here we are 35 years later talking about the management structure of our power here on Long Island. And so I'm here today to really fully support the model of a publicly owned power authority. The third party model, in my view, has been inefficient in both production of power as well as service to the people of Long Island. I believe moving toward a public authority would save on administration costs, provide greater transparency, and provide the public with a greater choice in the production of power for this area. This is a geographic monopoly, incredibly valuable. Several million people receive power from this power authority. I believe that monopoly is ours as the people of Long Island. Now, I am no fan of monopolies, but they make sense in certain situations like this one. And I would like to see the people of Nassau, Suffolk, the Rockaways, and I'm going to say Peconic County to have greater input in the direction of our power production and service area. So that's it. Just wanted to lend my voice, and I strongly urge that you go forward with this action plan and make this thing happen.
So thank you, Councilman Scavone, and again, thanks to the town of Southampton for hosting us today. We appreciate it. I did promise my commission members that it would be sunny and 80 degrees here in the Hamptons this week, and we didn't quite live up to that. But
Working on it.
I have one question for you. And you talked about oversight a little bit. You talked about the Department of Public Service. When the LIPA Reform Act was established in 2013, the Department of Public Service, DPS Long Island, was a new creation, a DPS office just for Long Island. And you know, part of the issue that I've had with that is that they have no teeth, they have no authority. They can make recommendations, you know. I've made recommendations to the PSE&G Long Island. They don't always listen to recommendations. Unlike every other utility, there's no private investor-owned utility. The Department of Public Service, the Public Service Commission, have no oversight, no authority over LIPA, and LIPA is completely separate. That's why you get, you know, different rules for things like, consumer choice aggregation and things like that. Would you foresee, under a new model, or what would you think of the possibility of giving some enforcement authority, some oversight, some check over LIPA by giving some increased authority to the Department of Public Service or the Public Service Commission?
That is entirely appropriate under the direction of elected boards from the people of this area.
Yep. All right. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Senators,
Okay, thank
Assembly
you.
members.
Thank you. Next, Lynn Arthur.
Yeah, Peconic County will work.
And then again, after Ms. Arthur, we'll have Mike Gordon. So please be ready.
It has no power.
Okay.
Oh, cool.
Put it over here for now.
Got an exhibit chart.
Now we get down to brass tacks.
Yeah.
Well, I want to open by saying thank you for making the effort to get out here. It is definitely not easy, given the traffic and the highways. Okay. I think it's good afternoon at this point. My name is Lynn Arthur, and I'm a LIPA ratepayer living in Southampton. I founded Peak Power Long Island, a not-for-profit to assist municipalities with public engagement concerning renewable energy policy programs and projects. Today, I'm representing myself in the role of concerned citizen living on the South Fork of Long Island, a coastal community with fragile ecosystems. At the December meeting, I was asked the question whether LIPA would be allowed to continue to regulate itself. I'd like to use this opportunity to put a finer point on my response by offering some examples for your consideration. Most people associate the 2015 South Fork RFP with offshore wind. However, one of the 5 elements recommended to the LIPA board at its September 2016 meeting involved a demand response program. As indicated on pages 9 and 11 in the part of the materials that I have distributed, Applied Energy Group, or AEG, would be responsible to utilize devices and systems to reduce load by 8.3 megawatts. It goes on to say that the AEG decision would support New York State's reforming the energy vision objectives with proven solutions for controlling air conditioners and energy efficiency solutions like LED lights. In January of 2019, 4 years later, we received a report indicating that AEG had achieved 70% of its target with just 5 months to its deadline. Now, this story has a happy ending for AEG. You see, instead of paying substantial fines and potentially losing their lucrative contract with PSEG LI for missing their target, the rules were changed whereby AEG were allowed to offer contracts to commercial customers on the South Fork with carbon-based emergency generators, whereby these customers would be paid to operate their gas and diesel generators on demand for payment. It became known that 8 PSEG Long Island commercial customers in Southampton had contracted with AEG. The town expressed concern and sent a letter to LIPA. You see, emergency generators are a legally defined use under the town's building code. Operating an emergency generator on demand for payment at the utility's request is not defined and therefore illegal. A letter was written to the LIPA CEO expressing concern and requested contact information for those businesses under contract in Southampton so they could be notified. At a minimum, there is potential risk from an insurance perspective. The response from LIPA was, "Thank you, but we cannot provide that information due to privacy." Meanwhile, if you're familiar with municipal law, this change in contract terms, as it was explained to me, is substantial and would ordinarily require reissuance of the RFP from which this contract was awarded. I just have a little bit more. A year later, NYSERDA posted a request from PSEG LIPA in which they were seeking innovative approaches to increasing enrollment in their direct load management tariff. Peak Power collaborated with town staff, organized a consortium, and proposed a residential battery storage program that over time would form the basis for a virtual power plant. NYSERDA made Peak Power a subcontractor and gave Peak Power a contract to work with the town. During program design, we discovered those gas generators, those same generators, were paid at a much higher rate than the clean battery storage for the same measure of curtailment. It's like a car and a truck pull up to a gas pump, and the car is charged one price for gas per gallon, and the truck is charged a different price. We asked NYSERDA at the time to organize a call with LIPA, PSEG, and DPS Long Island. We asked if our batteries can be paid at the same rate as the gas generators, and we were mystified by their response. It seemed that LIPA didn't know that PSEG's subcontractor was subsidizing payments to these gas generators whereby the gas generators were paid at a much higher rate than the smart thermostats for the same kilowatt hour of curtailment. Then NYSERDA said on that same call, let's assume Southampton's battery program is wildly successful. What would be the mechanism to retire those gas generators and utilize the clean battery storage in their place? PSEG responded with, why would we do that? That contract is in maintenance mode. No reason to switch. In summary, where to begin? Under the terms of the contract, AEG should have been fined and the RFP rebid. LIPA cannot be allowed to change the rules to accommodate a subcontractor because they are projecting a shortfall. Subcontractor oversight seems absent in this situation. Transparent project management would have predicted the shortfall earlier. Technology has been evolving at an accelerated rate for years. Contracts that extend greater than 3 years need mandatory out clauses so they can be retired to mitigate the risk of stranded assets. The current structure is not accountable to ratepayers, state mandates, or responsive to the local municipality. If New York State residents outside the LIPA service area have access to New York State programs, then we on Long Island should have the same. It seems to me...
Ms. Arthur, sorry. If
I'm
you could
done.
just finish your sentence, but please bring it to a conclusion.
It seems to me that all of this is a direct consequence of self-regulation. Thanks again for the opportunity to address the panel.
So, thank you, Lynn. So, again, you really focused on a particular instance, but really highlighted the issue of the lack of oversight and checks and balances on what
Yeah.
LIPA, PSE&G can do. So, as we look, at the restructuring, what kinds of things would you like to see included in a new LIPA that would guarantee that a proper level of oversight? How should we do that?
Well, I really like the narrative between the panel and Bridget. This idea of wards is a great one. Represented because people from the community, not everybody has an interest in this topic. Obviously, there are many people in the audience that are yet to speak, environmental leaders that really understand what the issues are here and have great ideas as to how to resolve them. So local representation is good, but local representation must come with qualification. People who are representative of these groups could work, under the selection and in conjunction with a county legislator. That's a great idea. But they have to, have the knowledge. They also need to be compensated. You're not going to get a volunteer to take the amount of time that's needed in order to dive into these issues, understand, participate in Public Service Commission proceedings if you don't compensate them in some way. So, that's a great idea. But, and then the other point I want to make is, with regards to should they regulate themselves, look, the elephant in the room is we understand the need, the value that self-regulation has to the credit agencies. So whatever it is that you decide, it's just this independent oversight needs to be strengthened in some way. Somebody has to have the authority from the outside to direct, give orders, and then enforce them.
Yeah, I think it goes to the point about future bonds and what's in those covenants, because right now, existing bonds, prior bonds, as you said, right in those covenants was, kind of the way that rates get set. And every time you talk about more oversight, somebody says, well, you're going to violate the bond covenants. Well, maybe those bond covenants really going forward aren't in the best interest of ratepayers. One last question. You've been very involved with community choice aggregation, and I know our next speakers probably can speak to that and probably will speak to that. But that's one example of a program where the rules were different on Long Island than they are in the rest of New York State, where there was a Public Service Commission order with regard to community choice aggregation, but because we have an authority here, they had no jurisdiction and the rules were different here. Is there, not just with this program, but any of the programs that are out there under the auspices of the Public Service Commission and DPS, is there ever a reason why the rules and the choices for Long Island should be different than they are in the rest of the state?
I think that LIPA they make a good point in why they've now divided power supply into recoverable and non-recoverable. They have to, there's the debt service associated with the layers of these long-term contracts for local generation. But as we've discovered, and the next speaker will, if you ask him, he'll respond to this with more specificity. Work has been done to actually examine those contracts, and there are out clauses that could be exercised. We have a lot of stranded assets on Long Island. We have, meaning long-term contracts with generation in places that are no longer suitable to meet the emerging needs of where density now exists. So for example, on the South Fork, we've undergone a tremendous increase in year-round residents. And so the demand, and that's what this chart shows, the demand on the South Fork has grown significantly, and maybe significantly higher than anywhere else on Long Island. Well, you don't want to have a power generating asset up island to serve the South Fork, because then you have to build more transmission in order to, at a huge cost and a lot of disruption, and local people don't want that, to get that energy to the South Fork where the demand is. You really want to design it so that you can put the generating assets should be local to where the demand is. So those are the kinds of changes that are underpinning some of the Public Service Commission orders that are coming. In fact, the one that actually happened this week. So that's really important.
Thank you. Other questions?
Yeah, just a couple of brief ones. Good to see you again, Lynn.
Thanks.
And when you talk about the influx, I believe the net result was about 1 million New Yorkers left. Assemblyman Thiel and I both had our districts geographically shrunken because we had the most influx, I think, than any other area of the state. Right, Fred? I think that.
Yeah, we're fastest growing area of the state.
Yeah.
People aren't leaving the East End for Florida. They're coming to the East End.
Yeah, and that's what
From Florida.
I think it's New York's Florida.
This is electricity consumption for just the Southampton area. This chart.
How much it's increased, right?
How much it's increased year to year, 4 years in a row. And this is
It
the
also
summer.
goes to I always tell people that it's a seasonal community. When you get east of the Shinnecock Canal, 60% of all the houses on the South Fork get their tax bill in another location.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know after the pandemic what the season is anymore, right? I mean, it's not a Memorial Day to Labor Day kind of thing.
Yeah.
And what you have seen, especially with people able to work from home, that they spend more time here.
Yeah.
More years. So it's something we need to think about. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Tim. Go
exactly.
ahead.
No, not at all. And that's
And
I
when
live
they
on the
get-
North Fork, which has been discovered. But the point of I actually have a question. It's very timely what you're saying regarding peak power, peaker plants. We just had yesterday a hearing in Albany all day on the CLCPA, and we were discussing, and I even commented at one point. It's, we believe it. You don't have to, because a lot of the papers and testimony was regarding whether or not climate change exists. We all believe it. We voted for it. We get it. But now we need to think about the actual brass tacks transmission as to how it's going to happen, or the reliability side, and what we're going to do regarding getting there. So I think your oversight, and I think maybe it's more of a comment that I'm looking, because there are times when we need to, and what we're doing now, I think New York City was going to close all their peakers by 2025. That's not happening. So we need to think of the reliable transmit. We all want to get to even 100% renewables. So I think that's very critical when you're saying that there's no oversight. Do you have any comments in that regard on how we're going to make that transition? Because we're going there. New York State is ahead of the pack. We're going to get there soon. So how do you suggest?
Well, I'll make a quick observation, but I would ask that you ask that question to the next speaker, because he can articulate it more precisely. But if you remember at the last hearing, I talked about a little project that we did in Southampton under the leadership of our CCA administrator, where we looked at originally 400 sites, parcels that the town has ownership of. We determined that 15 of them were opportune to do battery storage or solar or both. And then we created a proposal. We brought it to LIPA, and Mike will talk about what happened next. But there's money available at the federal level to enhance the grid at the locations where these these projects could be built, generating jobs and renewable energy, and it's all good and in a place where it's needed, right? That's our thinking. So what I would leave you with is not all good ideas come from within, but there's no mechanism by which ideas like this and expertise that exists in this room can be vetted, that can be brought to the table, that can be considered. They have Utility 2.0, but it's not a process that's very friendly, and it just doesn't seem to work. But these problems can be addressed with clean, renewable solutions that are not going to cost the ratepayers anything.
Great. Thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions? Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you.
Mr. Mike Gordon?
Hi.
If you want them to advance the slide, you can just tell me.
Okay. So I'm Mike Gordon. I am the Chief Strategy Officer and founder of Jewel Community Power. What we do is we administer community choice aggregation programs, and we are as well working with our communities to develop innovative programs that are far more expansive than simply community choice aggregation. I want to thank you guys because it's timely what you are doing, and it is time sensitive. And I'll go right to the end with respect to recommendations, and then I'll contextualize it quickly. The recommendations are, I thought that Bridget's suggestion with respect to elections are critical. I think that your question about the wards is a good idea. I think you also have to be cognizant of cross-cutting expertise, representation with by experts who have cross-cutting, who are not just the geographic representatives. I'd also say, and this is not just you, but trustees have told me that they need to be better equipped with information. And I would suggest funding for engineering reports, data analytics, actionable initiatives that the leadership can take. Otherwise, they will continue to be powerless in the face of executives who I'm sure have the best interests at heart, but they are not aligned with respect to incentives. And now I'll quickly go through this. And this is the opportunity, and I will explore it with the Infrastructure and Inflation Reduction Act. We have 2.4 gigawatts coming in off the East End, and that will be far more. In the next several years, that will be far more. Let's go to the next slide. I think it's 9 gigawatts. If you take a look at the congestion, and this is just simply New York City prices compared to Long Island prices, the congestion, Long Island prices are higher because congestion goes west to east. When it's negative there, that's east to west issues. And LIPA will, of course, be upgrading the transmission system with their $4 billion of borrowing capacity that I think you guys passed 2 years ago in the governor's budget. So let's go to the next. Now, this is extraordinary. If you look at LIPA's interconnection map, look at how red it is out on the east end of Long Island. So if we're going to be importing wind into this system, clearly it needs transmission upgrades, but also there's an extraordinary opportunity to upgrade the distribution system and to create economic development engines for the local community. Let's go to the next slide.
Before you do that,
Yes.
what do the colors mean?
Okay. Blue is unconstrained. 5 megawatts of opportunity for injection into the grid for local distributed energy resources. Red is nothing.
Okay.
There's no opportunity to inject given the current distribution infrastructure. Okay, next slide, please.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then we did the site survey that Lynn was describing, and what's remarkable is of the 361 sites that were reasonably viable to put storage in, there were 3 that can accommodate more than 3.5 megawatts. 3. And there's roughly a total of 95 megawatts, but that would be asking people to build 100 and 200 kilowatt storage units, which it's just not cost effective. You want to do the 5 megawatts that actually generate bill credits for consumers. There could be 1.85 gigawatts of capacity on those lines alone. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Now, LIPA, in a process that was not really collaborative, what they did, and it was interesting, they took the applications for distributed energy resources, folks who wanted to build storage or solar, and they saw where they had a lot of applications, and so they identified 48 sites for upgrade. But there's little community collaboration in that in terms of what the community actually wants. There's very little exploration of that in the process. And we do, by the way, have legislation that I and Pete Harcum have drafted, and you will be seeing it shortly, on how to deploy community choice aggregation effectively to empower the community, but critically, the community is a resource. It's an opportunity. We are here. Yeah.
Can I make a comment on that? Just
Sure.
because we actually had this issue in my district in Holbrook, which is noted up there, and there was a battery storage facility proposal. The community was up in arms because it was right next to a community. It was literally across the street from a big residential community, and the town of Islip has no code that even speaks to it at all. So the town couldn't even. They were basically applying for a change of zone or a change of use that wasn't even. It would have been something brand new. So I think, to your point, I think there's some.
Yeah,
updating.
and we have prepared an application for $250 million to the infrastructure law. It was due last Friday. We submitted and LIPA submitted. Now, separately, even though we talked to LIPA before they submitted, we feel that we need LIPA in order to succeed. LIPA needs the community in order to succeed. And there needs to be real agency over what the community is doing with respect to line upgrades. You want to have it where the community wants it and send folks away where the community doesn't want it. So act as a magnet rather than as a force. So you can magnetize folks to revitalize the communities by where the community wants it. And these facilities, they don't only generate jobs, they also are generating credits that can go to the low-income community. 10 and 20 years of 10% bill credits to the low-income community through the distributed energy program. And they can, the community can allocate those credits under community choice aggregation. The community should be able to identify who it feels those credits should go to, how to revitalize a community as that community wants to, and then to build the resources that then will be in place for longer-term microgrids when we need islands of opportunity. This should be a collaborative, joint approach, critically important from our perspective. I guess we could just go on.
Well, no.
We
Are there other
interrupted him a
questions?
couple of times with questions, so let's give him just a little extra time because we did interject some questions to him before he had used his time. So you deserve a little bit of a credit for that.
Okay.
To use the phrase today. Just give you maybe a minute and a half to kind of sum
Okay.
up.
Okay. So all I would say is so let's go to the next slide and then back to this one, and I promise you I will sum it up really quickly. So when you're looking at the federal government funding, what we're suggesting is that we can set up a collaboration between the community, the informal authority, the formal authority, the CCA authority, and we can actually create generation engines which drive credits into the low-income community with collaborative planning with the utility. And that's so it's a kind of an interim. I know that you guys are suggesting longer term. In the interim, we can revitalize these communities collaboratively. And we'll more likely get the money. And then if we go back, and basically all I'm saying is that elections and, again, access to information. You need engineering reports. You need data. You need public funds for the people at the grassroots to do the studies that need to be done so that we can get actionable recommendations, so that you guys can understand what needs to be done, so that the trustees themselves can as well understand what needs to be done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Two questions before you leave. I want to talk more about elections because and electing board members, because there's after you start to think about this for a while, it becomes a lot of issues with this, and there's certainly a great appeal to me with elections because it's the ultimate in accountability, as I find out every 2 years. So and we're looking for accountability. But then when then you have to set them up. What are these elections going to look like, right? So we talked a little bit about that. I'm going to ask you about one question because you kind of referenced it, and that is at one of the prior hearings when we asked, we were talking about elections. Should there be any qualifications to be able to run to be if we had elections to be a member of the Board of Trustees? And I think, I forget which public power company, whether it was the one in Arizona or the one in California, but they said they have no qualifications at all, special qualifications, and that's what staff is for, right? I mean, so just like anybody can run for the Assembly or for the Senate or whatever, if you're a qualified voter. Well, I wouldn't use Congress as an example.
Sorry.
But the Assembly or the Senate.
He was a former LIPA member.
Yeah.
Let's see.
He
Let me invent
invented
a few
wind
degrees.
power. Yeah.
So the science committee.
But just too easy a joke. Just hit it out of the park. But some thought about that because you seem to indicate kind of the opposite of that, or maybe I misunderstood. But to run to be a trustee, should there be qualifications other than you're a resident and eligible voter?
Well, I think that I think it would be powerful to build a good bench. And by that I mean, so I like the idea of geographic representatives. I also think that on the spending of the $250 million of infrastructure bill, if we actually get it, I think that the community itself should have agency over the upgrades that are done. And so therefore, what you're creating in collaboration with the development community, sending people away from where it's going to be a problem, it just streamlines the whole process. So as you build these local councils, I would think that you're creating a bench for your ward system of qualified and experienced folks who are used to getting the data that would be valuable with respect to decision making about prioritization. How many megawatts? Is it coterminous with the school system, with a place where people can shelter in place? Is there a supply of supermarket? That sort of thing where you're creating basically mini emerging microgrids. That I think builds your bench, and that would be a ward system bench in essence. And then perhaps you could have qualifications for the cross-cutting positions on the board. The dynamic resilience capability, the consumer representative, the environmental representative.
Yeah, that goes maybe to the point of maybe, I've heard in some of these series we talked about hybrid, where you might have some appointed members who have some of that expertise, whereas you have some elected members that are from the general public.
Yep.
The other issues that come up with elections that that we all have to think about. I mentioned partisan versus nonpartisan. I think there's certainly an appeal to nonpartisan elections. When should they be held? Should they be held in November during when the regular elections are? Should they be separate? Campaign finance, ethics statements, things of that nature. The whole structure of this. Those are all things we'd have to think about, I think.
And obviously you save money if you dovetail with an election. You also may lose some of the issues in the noise of that local election. I think it might be interesting if you had separate elections, maybe coterminous with coterminous. I don't know what I'm saying. With with a primary, which is a less. I don't know, but I think that it would be great to focus
Nor
on
do I,
that
but there
election.
are all issues that we have to consider, I think, as a group and with our advisory committee, we're going to have to come to grips with. One last question, because you talk a lot about transmission, obviously, transmission capacity, all of that is important. This has always kind of bothered me. I'd just like to get your comment. We've all, there's been, great promotion and great support for offshore wind projects. Not unanimous, but great support as a way of generating renewable energy, particularly on Long Island. We have one project off of Montauk that's under construction. There's others that have gotten approvals. There's still others that where there's another solicitation for lease sites. So there's going to be multiple wind farms out there, and in each case, it's that company, they're responsible for their transmission facilities, for getting it to shore, providing the infrastructure onshore to do that, and it's, in some cases it's been a little contentious. Certainly out here in Waynescott, it was very contentious. Less so right now with another project that's coming ashore at Smith Point. But here's my question. In some ways, it seems inefficient to me that you're going to have basically all of kind of these, each project without any comprehensive planning at all, with basically all lines of spaghetti in the Atlantic Ocean coming ashore here. Another one's coming ashore there, and it's all kind of up to the person who what they think is the best interest of that individual project. If you're going to have this much wind power offshore, some sort of comprehensive or integrated transmission system seems to me might have made more sense than this. But I guess, how do you get these companies to work together? But are we approaching transmission when it comes to wind power in the most efficient way, or how do you see that?
What an interesting question. So I think that we could orchestrate in concert cost effectively. I do believe that. And I think that the idea of a lot of storage systems that are local and that act as underpinning for future microgrids could be really powerful, because they're also generating revenue for the local community. And there are also significant transmission savings east to west. And I won't go to that chart, but that's going to be reversed. So the New York power prices are now lower than Long Island because the transmission is constrained. But if you're going to have 9 gigawatts coming in from offshore, and you've got an island that consumes less than 5 at peak, and you've got a city that's consuming 14, and the wind is blowing at different hours than the people are consuming, the concept of working in concert to create economic development, not just the jobs to build, but the development from the transmission revenue, from the distribution revenue, from the credits that are coming from those plants, dedicating it to lower income communities, getting the communities themselves engaged in the planning, and then building a concerted plan which is economically viable and equitable. I just think there's some brilliant, it's a brilliant question, and obviously we're not going to explore it here today, now. But it's really powerful.
I just raised the question.
It's a good question.
Thank you. Other questions?
Just quick comment, if I could, and question. So that grid, the red grid photo that you had, that's really disheartening, because infrastructure yesterday at the hearing, hours and hours, we were talking just about these issues and renewables. Half of New York's energy is purchased somewhere else,
Yeah.
which is fossil fuel produced from Pennsylvania, Ohio. So when we see this coming ashore, that's great, but the lowest estimate of the witnesses I saw yesterday, $280 billion to retrofit our grid to handle what we're hoping to do. So do you have any suggestions? Because that is awful. And when we have almost, what is it, a total of almost 1,000 gigawatts coming in eventually, right? Sunrise is 900 and something megawatts.
Yeah,
Another
so
one's
there's
90 or so, right?
roughly 2,400 that's slated for completion by 25, I believe. And the goal is 9,500.
Yeah, which is incredible. And what,
Yeah.
gigawatts, about 750,000 homes, I think that's the number.
Yeah, I
Something
could
like
try to
that.
do the math. About
Right, it's
8
a lot.
megawatt
Right,
hours
right.
per
And-
home.
And the other wrinkle was, and this is going to be addressed, so as you said, this is timely, that was being addressed significantly yesterday, is because of New York's environment, 2,000 megawatts of renewables are being sold elsewhere than New York State. So this is kind of a comprehensive issue that is very timely, and everyone's trying to get to yes. So I just think about that, and if you have any comments regarding how we're going to be able to even absorb some of that power coming in from the ocean, because that is not going to work.
Yeah,
As
it's
far as
not.
powering at least us.
It's
Let's
not,
talk
and I
about
think-
Senate District 1, because the reddest district I see in this entire map is SD1. So that's a huge concern when I see those. I mean, that's just really disheartening.
Yeah.
Would you just any comments on that? I'm sorry to
Well,
go on and on. But.
I think that community empowerment. So one of the issues in building a new power plant is you need a customer on the back end of that power plant. Otherwise, you won't get it financed. So if you actually have community choice aggregation with the capability for municipalities to say, we want to be renewable and we want a fixed price for the next 10 years for our residents, even though they can opt out, that gives folks the capability to get the funding to build the power plant. And then you need to have the ability to transmit it. I think, and I am not an expert here, now I'm stepping out where I maybe don't belong, but I think that if you were to have spinal transmission upgrades, east to west, I believe that there would be significant revenue in it to feed the energy hog New York City. And I think that it would be beneficial to Long Island consumers.
Got it.
And then add the robust distribution upgrades so that people can generate locally.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
the only thing that I'll add to your comments and to what Fred said is that one of these offshore wind projects I know off Smith's Point goes up William Floyd Parkway for the transmission, down the expressway into my district in Holtzville to enter the grid and to enter the transmission system. I'm assuming this is part of what you're talking about, how there's a lack of the ability to infuse this.
Yeah, and then there's no storage. So it's
Right.
just generating when it runs. And so you don't have the ability to drink it up and then inject it when it's most valuable to be injected.
Right. Okay. All right, thanks.
Other questions?
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next three speakers. That might be the first round of applause in all our hearings.
Didn't count for any of us.
They didn't boo. I count that as a win.
Yeah, right. That's a win. If it's neutral, we won.
That's great.
Gloria Burke, Peter Gullen are our next two speakers. And then we'll go from there. Our third speaker will be Imran Ansari. So Gloria Burke, Peter Gullen, and Imran Ansari.
Okay.
Ms. Burke.
Thank you very much for having this meeting today and for my ability to add my points. My name is Gloria Burke, and among other hats I wear, I'm co-chair of the Sustainability Committee here in the town. but I'm really speaking for myself as a ratepayer, someone who cares a lot about the environment and has some knowledge, having spent lots of hours in a meeting room with Lynn Arthur. I do think that the utility has to be a public utility, and it has to be regulated by the Public Service Commission, similar to every other utility in the state. Right now, we've got this hybrid, which we've all said doesn't really work. I was thinking that the board should have appointed directors, not from the governor's office, but from the legislature, as well as locally elected directors. And as I was listening to others speak, I'm thinking that the appointed directors could be the ones that come with some grid experience, which was a point I had, but I'm sort of putting them together now, and then having local people as part of the council to bring that local knowledge in. Similar to what our sustainability committee has been doing. You know, we get someone in the committee who has a passion for a specific way to correct the environment. They run with it, and we make changes. I mean, the plastic bag ban started that way. Obviously, if the management is done locally by a public utility, we're going to save money. So I think that's very important. As a state, we've been talking about wanting to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, and I'm hoping that a new Long Island Power Authority could be a leader in this effort. I mean, we live on an island where global warming is here right now, and so I think we've got a lot of passionate people that will work with this utility and help lead the state in some of the things we could do. The management has to be transparent to the community in budgeting, where they're going to put transmission lines, address grid resilience, and then partner with local municipalities and commercial entities to increase renewable energy. This should all be out in the public eye. And we've talked about community choice aggregation. I mean, we here in Southampton would like to be able to participate in some of these programs. And if we have a public utility that doesn't limit some of these opportunities, would be great for the community in total. So thank you. I don't think I've said anything revolutionary, but repeated from a local taxpayer's point of view. I'm agreeing with a lot of what's been said.
Thank you, Gloria. Any questions?
But thank you.
Thank you.
Peter Gollan?
Good morning. First, I'd like to thank you all for doing what you're doing, which has to be much harder than what I've been doing. My name is Peter Gollan. I'm a resident of Huntington for 43 years. As a LIPA trustee for 5 years, I've seen a fair amount from the inside of the operations of LIPA and LIPA as relating to PSEG. I'll try to skip through my prepared testimony because, first of all, I think I'm preaching to the choir, and secondly, I want to talk about and elaborate on some of the comments previously. The LIPA business model was praised by Chris Hahn at the November hearing. I read through his testimony, or heard his testimony last night. I think it was correct. I also think it was incomplete because he praised, he said PSEG was, let me get the right words here, was a proven and tested model. If I had to offer my own judgment, I would quote from the book of Daniel, measured, counted, and found wanting. He said they were committed to excellence and to continuous improvement. That's not the case. They were, when problems were discovered by LIPA management couldn't get them to fix the problems without bringing those problems to the LIPA board, which would then pass a resolution directing PSEG to fix it. That process could take a 3-month delay between when a problem was noticed and when they started preparing a schedule for how they were going to remedy it. If you ran your own company, you'd walk down the hall and say, fix this, and they'd get to work the next day on it. So that's just inefficiency of time, and I'm not talking about the money. 2 areas where PSEG was deficient. One is inventory management. They had to be directed to construct or find a enterprise business management program to keep track of the hundreds of millions of dollars of physical assets that LIPA owns that they couldn't find and couldn't tell how many transformers they had. You can't run a utility that way, but they were doing it. Mr. Hahn was asked about the list of customers who had medical needs and needed priority restoration. Did they have such a list? The answer is yes. PSEG had such a list. He was correct. What he didn't say is the list was not maintained. It had twice the percentage of customers needing priority that any other surrounding utility had. Did they know if those customers were still alive? No. Did they know if those customers still had medical needs? No. They did nothing to keep that list up to date, so that attending to needs that were not there detracted from fixing needs that were there. They had to be told to fix it. So this is not the quality operation that Mr. Hahn was describing. Did PSEG help in saving LIPA $2.5 billion by not building another fossil fuel plant? I'm sure their work did. But if you go back and look at the documents, you'll find that let me get the dates right here. The 2004-2013 energy plan already showed the need for more energy conservation. The 2010 to 2020 electric resource plan showed the need for more conservation, more renewable energy, and that more renewables were needed in order for LIPA to meet the state's energy code and reduce the carbon dioxide. I was out there demonstrating against Caithness. Other elected officials were, assembly members. Engelbright was, the local school boards were against it. It failed. So yes, PSEG played a role, but that was not the defining role. So it's time to take...
Kind of like taking credit for the sun rising in the
well,
morning, right?
Okay, let's not stretch it that far.
Okay. The sun did rise today, though, right?
Yeah, okay. But okay. He claims that they are now sufficiently well supervised that they'll do a good job with a 200 and some odd page summary of the metrics. Well, why did they have that? Because they screwed up so badly with the computer system under Tropical Storm Isaias. You look surprised. And lied about it. That LIPA said they were going to terminate the contract and put them into default for not delivering. PSEG said they would sue. And in order to avoid that stalemate, they compromised with the arm twisting by the governor for the present OSA. So it's now, to my way of thinking, the way a teenager who's been grounded after carousing too much now says, well, I'll be a good boy because my parents are watching me very carefully. They can't take credit for being...
Mr. Gollin, please
Okay.
bring it to a conclusion.
Okay, thank you. LIPA now has the ability, intellectual ability, and staff ability to take over the direct management with maybe a half dozen hires. For the last 10 years, PSEG has been the equivalent of training wheels. They don't need the training wheels anymore. Take off the training wheels and let them go it alone and do a better job.
Thank you. Peter, what years were you on the LIPA board?
Let's see what that was. 2016 to 21.
Okay, so recently.
Yes.
So, here's my question. So you saw it all. You saw what happened during Tropical Storm Isaias and all of that. And as you said, the new contract with PSE&G was kind of forced from the governor's office.
Yeah.
That's just a fact. The LIPA was looking at all of the alternatives, including public power. you know, and then one Saturday morning, Sunday morning in June, you know, there was a new contract. So, you know, my question really is that, you know, it's one thing to disagree about, you know, what power source or this project or that project, but the trust has been broken. Trust has been broken from PSE&G to LIPA and PSE&G with the public. And, you know, I think if you observe this, you don't have to be a close observer. You just have to maybe read the newspaper, you know, on a fairly regular basis. Yeah, I mean, you know, you still can see that the relationship between LIPA and PSE&G is not a good one. You know, the testimony we've had is that, you know, LIPA has basically said that PSE&G still is in compliance with a lot of, you know, the metrics and standards with regard, particularly with regard to communication that needed to be met. And, you know, aside from the model itself, in my opinion, being a flawed model, it's like the antithesis of oversight and transparency. I mean, it just seems to me that trust is broken, and it's the hardest thing in the world, you know, to fix. It doesn't come easily, and I really haven't seen any actions from PSE&G that really have restored that trust. It seems like there's still a lot of tension between, you know, LIPA and PSE&G, even today. I mean, what do you see?
I can't comment on that too much because of lack of knowledge.
Okay.
I do know that. I
Well,
mean,
then you're never going to run for political office.
thank goodness. Thank goodness. I mean, it's a three-way dance between LIPA, PSEG, and the local DPS. When LIPA constructs its budget, and they have their utility 2.0, they'll go and talk to. I'm telling you secondhand now. They'll go and talk to the DPS office, and certain things that were proposed are recommended against by DPS. So there is some interchange there. When the recommendations are made against it, they're not pursued by LIPA. So DPS can veto things. I don't know if it can move things in a positive way. Okay. Whether that's a constructive relationship or not, I don't know. Certainly having another set of eyes on it helps from the DPS. Whether that is a positive benefit net, I couldn't tell you. If I can say is, if under the current system, the LIPA staff supervises PSEG. It goes, it checks, did you do this, did you do that? And the board supervises LIPA staff. And the LIPA staff and Tom and his people report to the board and say what they find. If PSEG is out and the LIPA people are running the system, then the board will be supervising the actual operators of the system. They will need more expertise than we currently have, because you can't expect the LIPA operating staff to come and say, well, we're not doing this right, we should do it better. And that's what a number of the speakers earlier referred to. The board will need more support, either maybe the equivalent of an inspector general. I couldn't tell you how you do it, but they do need outside input. I don't think the people who just spoke, either Lynn Arthur or Mike Gordon, I don't know if their message never reached the board. Whether it reached LIPA or PSEG, I couldn't tell you. But LIPA needs that input in a very open way. There's a advisory committee that PSEG has, community advisory group. It's a farce. They set the agenda. PSEG sets the agenda. People come in, nod, and go home. What was I going to say?
I've got questions.
Yeah, we have other questions. So.
Okay.
Thank you, Peter, for your service on the board of LIPA. I mean, PSEG has a lot of issues, like you've already mentioned in your testimony, specifically about the lists that they maintain, right? You talked about those that need electricity because they are vulnerable, medical issues, whatnot. Have you brought it up to them when issues have popped up about how they maintain it? Like whether they, like, what happens once you tell them, hey, this is the issue? Do they come back to you and say they've resolved it, or do they just completely ignore you and leave?
That they would go back to the LIPA staff. I mean, there was this discussion of this in a committee meeting maybe 2 years ago about how that list was maintained. I think once they got, I'm guessing that once PSEG got a kick in the pants, they went and curated that list a little bit better, but they hadn't been doing it. So if you're interested in an honest answer, ask PSEG or ask LIPA. Don't ask me because I'm not.
But
plugged
you
in.
were on.
I was on the board when they were told we learned how that list was not being adequately maintained, and that was maybe 2 years ago.
Okay.
And I did not follow up on that.
And what does adequately maintained mean?
You would, for instance, inquire of the people on that list, do you still need a CPAP? You would ask somebody who applied to be on it, does your doctor specify that you need this medical equipment? You might or might not, and then you're getting into very personal issues. Go back after 2 years and, for one thing, say, is this person still living there? Is this person still alive? Did that person move to Florida? So you'll never get it perfect, but you want to have it reasonably correct, A, so you don't fail to restore service on a priority when somebody needs it, and B, so you don't spend your high priority time on somebody who doesn't need that attention.
I've asked this question to the Suffolk County legislator about LIPA saying, hey, you know, we pay PSEG $80 million to do this whole third-party management, and it's going to save us money if we get out of this. Do you believe LIPA can handle it? One. Second, when they stated that this was only going to cost $20 to $30 million in startup fees, is that accurate, do you believe, based off of your experience on board?
I'm going by the numbers that Tom Falcone gave us. I think he has been as straight a shooter as you can get.
Okay. Thank you.
Doug?
So thanks so much for sticking with it from the first hearing in Hofstra. I think you testified, and then your rebuttal, because I think he spoke after you spoke, possibly, but the rebuttal today. So a couple questions. Having served on the LIPA board, and normally I don't like to ask questions unless I already know the answer, so I'm going to preface this by saying it's not an indictment, I just don't know.
Okay, sure.
So who did you, and I'm going to say this maybe as somebody who was a high school math teacher, you don't like to teach to the test, but the reality is there's a Regents exam at the end of the year, so you're teaching every day, unfortunately, to that. Maybe that'll change. Who did you work for as a LIPA trustee? Not you specifically, but the board. Was there a sense that the board answers to Albany, or what was the sense?
Okay. There were rumors that certain trustees who were appointed by the governor were the governor's representative. When I asked those trustees, did the governor ask you to vote this way or that way, the answer I got was no. I have no reason not to believe that. I do know that the board activity was driven by LIPA staff. We would come in, they would be a need to approve this contract for buying power, hire this auditor or that, or this computer company. They would make a case, we would believe them. I mean, we'd ask questions in the committee, but they've done the legwork. The agenda for the board was pretty much set by LIPA staff. And in that sense, it's not this, I don't believe it's quite the same as a corporate board of a publicly listed company where the board plays a much more active role.
Okay, so what would you now envision would be an improvement on that board if if there needs to be an improvement. Maybe, you know, I know we've all suggested that we don't like the idea of Albany appointing it, even having 9 senators and 22 assembly members from Long Island. You know, just having the larger body appointed doesn't really make sense. But do you think it should be elected, or do you think it should be maybe appointed by the county legislature, or maybe a mix? Have you weighed in or have thoughts on that?
That's really, I mean, I don't mean to be
No, not at all.
snide. That's beyond my pay grade. I do know you want people on the board who can ask questions on finance, on technologies involved, on business, on public issues, on climate change, how you get them and what support you give them in terms of being able to ask those questions and get answers. Right now, LIPA was monitoring PSEG. If LIPA is running the show, then somebody who is not in the direct command chain of the CEO, who, by the way, has done an enormous job. I cannot speak more highly of anybody than of Tom Falcone. Somebody who's not in his chain of command should be able to walk around and ask questions and not have anybody in the LIPA high-end staff feel that they're being threatened.
Okay. Yeah, because I think when we're talking about governance, I think about even a school board. A school board would be people that are very passionate about education and get involved for various reasons, but then they hire a superintendent, they hire staff that advises them. There is an upper limitation, though, because the expertise is not necessarily there. It might be, but it might not be. But the passion is certainly there. On the flip side, having somebody be appointed like yourself, you might get that expertise. What was the process when you were appointed? Like, how, you know, and forgive me,
So the way I got appointed, it's all where you are and when you are. I was at one point the energy chair of the local Sierra Club. So I was out there with Steve Engelbride probably in the Brookhaven Town Hall making a ruckus about the Caithness plant. And we got to know each other. And when a vacancy appeared on the LIPA board, if somebody other than Steve told me I should be on there. And I looked at him and I said, "You're crazy. I don't want that." And then the opportunity arose a second time, and Engelbride approached me, and I said, "Sure, why not? I'm committed to that." And I resigned my position at the Sierra Club because I can't make a case here and then walk over to that side of the table. I like what I said. I'll vote for it.
Right. So I guess my final thought on that, because you actually just uncovered a really interesting point. You yourself may not have ever sought elective office.
No.
But you might be a perfect type of person to serve in this capacity with your experience. So I think that's interesting to consider as we go forward. So thank you.
Any other questions?
Just one more comment about landing of cables from offshore wind. Many years ago, maybe 8 years ago, I'll make up the number, Google I believe came out with a plan to run a offshore wind collector cable down the East Coast, offshore, connecting with the wind facilities that they thought would be off Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island, down to Virginia, so that excess wind energy could be shared among those plants and sent where it would be needed at any one time. If New York is overproducing, and obviously that hasn't happened yet. So that sort of goes to what you're saying.
Yeah, it does,
And the Brits are doing something similar now, where the generation is procured offshore is procured independently of the cabling system, so that it can be part of the local national infrastructure rather than being proprietary.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Our next 3 speakers are Imran Ansari, Bill Chalif, and Robert Tyson. So, Mr. Ansari, you are up.
Thank you. So my name is Imran Ansari, political director of the Long Island Federation of Labor, AFL-CIO, representing over 250,000 union members and their families in Nassau and Suffolk counties. I'd like to thank you for your commitment to a transparent and meaningful process to discuss the future management of LIPA's assets. This is an important conversation to have, and one we hope will be used to inform the Legislative Commission's thinking in a manner that brings about recognition of the implications your decision will have on the workforce and the ratepayers, both of whom we represent. Our affiliated unions represent the workers in power generation, distribution, construction, and maintenance of substations, as well as the employees of the contractors who maintain the system year-round. When the workforce responsible for bringing electricity to our homes is considered collectively, it is a significant part of the Long Island workforce and thus the community at large. Keeping that in mind as you consider changes to LIPA's management structure, we hope you will do so in a way that does not result in the erosion of jobs or create unnecessary downward pressure on wages and benefits. As stated by this commission at the start of its hearings and the leadership of LIPA, everyone who has collectively acknowledged the system failures during extreme weather events are not a reflection of the dedicated workforce charged with powering Long Island. It's a recognition that has been earned by the workforce and they should be proud of. Rather than attempt to introduce new information into commission hearings, I'd like to focus on some information previously introduced by someone who's not only an expert in the industry, but who has a unique understanding of this industry and this region. LIPA CEO Tom Falcone, who, as you know, is the vice chair of the large Public Power Council, a member of the New York State Climate Action Council, as well as a former advisor to publicly owned utilities and state and local governments, said during his testimony at the start of the commission hearings that LIPA's leadership is focused on a carbon-free electric grid by 2040, operating a highly reliable and resilient electric grid, delivering electric service at the lowest possible cost, and finally, outstanding customer service. As of the November 29th hearing, he was able to state that if nothing were done beyond what is already planned, that the carbon footprint of our grid would be reduced by 72% by 2030. He said power outages have been reduced by 37% since 2017, which was the result of significant investment in the system, prioritized by LIPA and carried out by the current service provider. Furthermore, LIPA was able to take advantage of its already public nature, as they were the recipient of significant sums of federal dollars, and coupled it with an aggressive capital improvement program aimed at hardening the grid. They managed to do all of this while keeping rate increases below the rate of inflation and raising rates less than surrounding utilities, some of which are fully public utilities. One of Tom's final points was about customer service. The fact that this metric has not moved in a positive direction under the current public-private model is unacceptable. We simply ask that none of the quantitative and qualitative metrics be considered in a vacuum. Clearly, the ideal outcome of this extensive legislative commission process will bring about great service for the customers. For our labor movement, the question of LIPA's management structure is not a question that should be decided ideologically. The decision should be made by data and analysis as well as respect for the long-term viability of the workforce. This is not the first time we find ourselves analyzing the management structure of our utility in the wake of a natural disaster. Unfortunately, it is unlikely to be the last. The nature of our geography puts us on the front lines of climate change. And I can say with certainty that in the wake of each disaster, it is our affiliates and their members, IBEW 1049 and otherwise, who will clean up the damage and repair the power system. Operating a hardened power grid that delivers affordable and reliable power is essential for us on Long Island. Climate change is not only real, but a generational crisis that, if unaddressed, will touch every facet of our lives. Therefore, I want to conclude by mentioning that by virtue of our geography, we are on the front lines of our climate crisis.
Thank you. And again, and I'm sure other members will reiterate, and we've said it actually already today, you know, we have a great appreciation for the workforce, and we certainly want to ensure that any of the recommendations, you know, have no impact on the rights and the jobs of the people that you represent. So, you know, that certainly is of critical importance to all of us. And you mentioned something about, you know, ideology, and I just will say that, you know, this commission, I've been in the New York State Assembly since 1995. It's been a long time. And, you know, of all the tasks and things that I've undertaken in all of those years, you know, working with the members of this commission, it's been one of the most bipartisan experiences that I've had. And it really points to the way I think the Long Island delegation approaches things anyway. And that is whether it's school aid or LIPA or whatever the issue is. And I'm including my Queens representative also. But we put, when it comes to issues like this, we put Long Island first. We're going to have to live with this. We're ratepayers, and you know, so I just want to mostly to my commission members, but also to the point you made, express how grateful I've been, and I know Senator Thomas has been, that as the chairs of this commission, how bipartisan, actually nonpartisan, and how focused on what's right for Long Island the commission has been so far. So thank you. Questions?
Imran, I just want to say thank you for everything that you do. My co-chair said, we owe a lot to the union workforce and everything that they do to keep the power on here on Long Island. As a representative of theirs, do you feel that if this third-party management system that we use through PSEG is eliminated and it all goes to LIPA to oversee, would it increase rates on our ratepayers here?
I don't know if I'm necessarily the best person to answer that question, to be honest. My feedback is focused primarily on, I myself, taking my federation hat off for a second, I live in Huntington, I'm a homeowner, I'm a ratepayer. So, as are the rest of the federation, as are the union members that go out and work on the lines every day.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't be saying what we're saying in a vacuum, and just focused on keeping our public-private model. Our rates are at the forefront of our minds because we also live here and we reside here, we pay taxes here, we pay these rates too.
Do you believe that if this is turned into a fully public entity, it would be harder on the union with their benefits or anything like that?
So I just want to take a step back and just say that we support the public-private model. I think it might be best for me to just read our commentary specifically on that point. We believe there's a solid evidence to suggest it works, and one of the points to speak specifically about the nature of the current system, we believe that the working families in our region are best served by the existing public nature of LIPA, allowing us to bond for investments at lower rates and providing accountability for the public, while simultaneously benefiting from the private expertise that we regularly competitively bid to deliver the best value for ratepayers. So, to that question, that's how I would answer that.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Doug?
Yeah, and I just think, just to echo in this bipartisan commission that we've had, and I think that everybody has had the minds of Local 1049, which is headquartered in the middle of my district in Holtzville. Very proud to have it. But the people that really do the toughest job during natural disasters, I think we all respect that, and we all are looking out for that. And I don't think anything's going to happen that would hurt any family in this regard. So, but thank you so much for your comments.
Yeah, and I don't know if anyone from 1049 is going to be testifying today. I've seen a couple of my brothers in the audience, so obviously their feedback is critical. I want to just continue to reiterate that the folks that are always on the front lines in these disasters are our workers. They're the ones that actually have to go out there and work on the lines when the rest of us are at home. It's important to keep them front of mind.
Other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bill Chaliff?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. Well, let's see. I should tell you, I'm here at the behest of PEER, representing PEER, which is the Progressive East End Reformers, a local multi-issue grassroots organization, and a chapter of NIPAN, which is the New York Progressive Action Network. But I'm an architect. I have a small firm here. It's my 50th year in business, and I've been involved with the issues of electric generation for a very long time, as Fred knows. I served as a member of the court-appointed CAP, which was the Citizens Advisory Panel, which was established by way of the settlement that shut shore them down. And Judge Weinstein established this oversight committee. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough operating funds, but we were in operation for over 13 years. I sat on that board and I never missed a meeting, a monthly meeting for 13 years, and that started back in 1989, and became familiar with issues of how LIPA operated and what they were doing. And of course, as Fred mentioned in the introductory remarks, we never really got a public power authority as it was intended to be. There were no elected representatives, and we had tremendous problems with that. And we would show up every once in a while just to shout and yell, members of the public, and say that this had to happen, and it never happened. So usually I find myself addressing boards with an adversarial posture, and I'm real happy to say I'm so pleased to hear where you're going, who you are, and I have every confidence that we're going to wind up in an infinitely better place. I think, yes, we need to totally restructure LIPA. The only question that hangs over is, do we, how much effort and how much time will be involved in restructuring that organization as opposed to starting perhaps with a clean sheet of paper. It was pointed out earlier that there are over 2,000 public authorities, power authorities, already in existence. It might be tremendously useful to go and evaluate and see how they're working, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And you may find a couple out there that may follow very, very closely the precise needs of our community over here. I would like to point out one other thing, and that is there is a list. The papers that I have in my hand were published by a Reimagine LIPA campaign. I'm sure you're aware of it, and you've seen their list of 15 points of recommendations. And I had circled the first 4 because they all deal with governance. I think governance is the key. The granularity and how transparent the organization becomes, and shows how responsive it would be to the local constituency, to the ratepayers, is critically important. But I was going to make some remarks about why we should get away from the existing model or the private model, and I just see that we don't need to go over those things. But there is something that I would like to discuss, and that is this. I've been involved with energy efficiency and planning for, again, close to the better part of 50 years. And when we look at the map that showed the red end, I would say that a lot of that is caused by the fact that we have a suburban settlement pattern. And I think that, distribution becomes, and tying together of, production versus, end user becomes far more difficult. And with a suburban distribution pattern, which happens to be the source of a lot of other problems we have, and particularly I think it's the foundational source, together with that being codes, land use and codes, with the affordable housing crisis that we have on the East End. So I would look at that tie-in, and even as Fred started to talk again about planning in general and integrating, how do we take all these offshore plants and coordinate between their tie lines? Do we have trunks? Not, it's the same. I'd looked to other industries for similar analogies, such as the airplane industry now is looking at, was the hub. We can't put airports everywhere, just like we can't put generational facilities for electricity everywhere. Is the hub method the best way of organizing and making flights efficient and economical. And
Mr. Chair,
lastly,
yeah, please bring it to a close.
right, just lastly, is that we are entering into a new place where up until now, customers have had options aside from electricity. But where we're going in a very rapid rate is taking all those options away, because we're going in a direction where I hope much sooner than anyone predicts, we really do get off all fossil fuels, and we're going to be a total, anything having to do with power is going to be electric power. And people will not produce that at home by themselves. That has to be a community sourced or regionally sourced facility. And because of that, I would think becomes a human right, just like having clean air and clean water, that people down on the lower economic rungs of the ladder, and this region is a split as you'll find anywhere in the United States, between people with extremely high and outrageous incomes and people who are, again, I know people are living in their cars and living in the woods out here. And these, I think, again, it's a human right that access to electricity be for everybody and be affordable, whether it's different scales and so forth. So I guess I'll conclude right there.
Thank you, Bill. And I just I don't have a question, but I just want to express my thanks for your commitment to energy issues, particularly Long Island's utility for many, many years. We were much younger men, when we were first met. I got to know each other with regard to the Shoreham nuclear power plant. So I just wanted to thank you for
I worked
all
on
that
that too
all
for
that
10
you've done.
years.
So
Thank you very much. Fred.
questions? Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Be well and good luck.
Next is Robert Tyson, and then there will be Lisa Savimley and Judy Black. Mr. Tyson.
Yeah, thank you for all being here today. I really am not an expert in this field. I came here as a exercise in education, okay? And it was very enlightening, okay? And the only thing I want to say from the outside is that whatever form that you folks decide to create in order to oversee, I think the most important thing you need to do is to get good people to do it. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Savimley.
Thank you very much. I have 5 minutes. I don't know what to do with it. I'm used to speaking in 3 minutes.
I don't know. It hasn't been a
So
problem
now I
for
have
anybody
time.
else, but go right ahead.
So I'm coming to you as a constituent and as a resident. I took a crash course within the past, 2 days that we saw one of the trustees speak at a civics meeting. So obviously I think what I'm hearing is that we're all on board making it a public utility, which I think is fantastic. I think that's something that needs to happen. The hybrid model that we have now, which is public-private, is also in Puerto Rico. So that is another, that's a problem that we had in Puerto Rico, and we know the problems arising from that. We also have that problem here with the public transportation, where it's a private-public matter, and it's for profit. So the $80 million that we're spending a year for management of the company is something that we could save on with the taxpayers. And there is data explaining that if it is a public utility, it does save the taxpayers or the homeowners or the renters or anyone that actually has utilities. So these are some things that I'm going to discuss from personal experience about appointed from different advisory boards or different committees that were set up. They tend to lean bipartisan, which is a problem because there is a population that isn't representative. So if you decide to go with a hybrid model, the people that would be selected or the trustees that would be selected from the hybrid model, they should be people that are experienced in energy, climate justice, cybersecurity, because that's a big issue. I just saw that California, I think it's called SMUD, is their electric. They had some breach, or not breach, I'm sorry, they were giving out the public's private information to their local law enforcement. So it definitely should be something that is kept private, and security, cybersecurity is something that's important, and especially since Suffolk County was attacked since September and we're still having issues with cyber issues. Let's see, the other thing too, when I was speaking on the advisory board or the committee that was created for the redistricting, they were not given a budget to work with, so they couldn't pull data. They weren't able to inform the public because they didn't have the funds to get the message out to the general public. So I think they should be given some kind of budget to work with to reach the public, because that's important. We need to know this. I didn't know this a week ago. I didn't know any of this. Also, the trustees that are on the board should be given some kind of stipend, $15,000, $20,000 stipend, so that way they're paid for the time that they're putting into this with their experience. They're doing this on their free time. You all are getting paid. You know, they should be having some kind of, it doesn't have to be a big stipend, but something that they're putting their heart and effort into this. And one of the committee boards that I went to, some of the members didn't even show up. So, and there was no repercussions for them not showing up, and that's a problem, especially when you're trying to get the public's voice involved in this. Like I said, the advisory board should definitely reach out to local civics and local school districts and speak at those so it informs the public about this, because this affects all of us. The other thing is that our local IDAs, they should also be reaching out to our local IDAs, because the IDAs are giving consent to building and overpopulating and building in districts, and there's no requirement for them to follow any kind of, that's a pull on the electric grid. That's more use on the electric grid. Let's see, what else did I have? Oh, so Shoreham, let's talk about Shoreham. That cost, what was it, Judy, did you say? $6 billion, and we're still eating $2 billion of it? Can we put that in the budget and have some of it absorbed by the state? Like at least $1 billion? That would give a break to a lot of taxpayers, and that would really be helpful, so that we're not feeling the impacts of that. And let's see, what else can I say? Budget for data collecting. I think I did pretty much everything. I think that it's important that it is bipartisan, and I think it should be, there should be an advisory board that reaches out to the public, and there should be a board of trustees, which I think a hybrid model would be great, and the part that the people get selected for that part should be qualified people with a track record. They should not be related to anybody working in office. There should be no nepotism. There shouldn't be an employee of somebody working in office, because that's another issue that we encountered during some of the committee hearings, is that they were the legislative aide to so-and-so, or the girlfriend to the legislative aide to so-and-so. So that's important to make sure that it is an advisory committee that is bipartisan and there is no relationship to whoever it is that appoints them. And I just want to give a shout out to Far Rock, because I lived on Beach 19th Street, and that neighborhood could do so much, and I know the neighborhood very well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Questions or comments?
That's good.
No. Thank you very much. You used your time well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Judy Block, and just so they are ready, Jose Alvarez will be next, and then Benny Torres. Ms. Block.
Hi, I'm Judy Black. I live in Shoreham. I was affected by Gloria and Sandy and this superstorm Isaias. And I want to say what they said. We got the idea going here. We need a change. We need it by the end of this contract at
2025.
2025. We need this to happen. I've got faith in your ability. I love the idea that of Mr. Thiel's suggestion of a Bill of Rights for consumers. The phone pole in Hurricane Gloria went that way, enough that the line to my house, instead of drooping, went that way. And I couldn't figure out, I heard it in the trees for so long. And LIPA wouldn't do anything until finally a master electrician was on the phone with them, and the people came out, and the fixture on the side of my house that sticks up was like this. I mean, as he said, the house could have burned down. We really need a responsive organization here. So everything they said, we need a full public power authority. It's time to eliminate the third-party management. The storm response failures firsthand were awful. Workable public power. We need public utility under the Public Service Commission. We need responsive, truthful, transparent communications. We need forward-thinking, reliable public utility. It's got to be resilient. It's got to be secure. The grid has to be secure. The people's information has to be secure. The rights of the workers have to be secure so that when we move forward, these folks who have 15 years in one retirement system don't go into 10 or 15 years in another one, and two different systems you drop in the middle. We have to move them forward in a method that makes sense to the individuals who are working. Okay, so if we get an advisory board that is local and diverse and inclusive, and we have management that is knowledgeable, and we have expertise, and we have security, we're going to be in pretty good shape. So everything they said, everything she said, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just a question?
Yes, question.
Sorry. Oh, I apologize. I'm not trying to prolong but I am kind of curious what, and we're live stream. I don't know if you can go back, sorry. Everybody else kind of weighed in on what their thoughts were about like how this board would come about. Do you have any feeling, and not to put you on the spot, but elected board, appointed board, maybe a mix?
I think that there will probably end up being an elected board, which cannot be more powerful than the advisory board. The expertise is going to be necessary, or we're going to get some, I hate to say, elected official who just is, I've got some power now, and is going to collapse the system. We cannot allow elected officials without knowledge. Somehow, I don't know if there's a way to require a knowledge base before they get to run for the office. And we all know that's kind of impossible.
It's a tough one, and even I think you bring up.
That is the really and truly the biggest issue, as the gentleman said. Get good people.
I think you bring up a good point too, because I think we've seen, I know in the town of Brookhaven, a village formed and then not able to deliver the service, but taxing the residents for it, and then a village quickly dissolved. So to have government structures just for the sake of having them, you're right, they have to be well served. So I think your points are well taken. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you. Mr. Alvarez, you're up, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for allowing us to be here. Number one, giving us the time. I think the first step to make anything better is to listen to the people and to get the more knowledge that you can. I think everybody knows information is more important than money. I think everybody has spoken great things about the system. They're talking about the elections. They're talking about the board. But there is one thing that nobody is touching, and it's the future. And as we all know, Long Island is already, especially the east end, is all red, as we saw on the map, which is scary. Just so you know, I own AL Energy Solutions LED, and also I am part of Element Energy Solar. And we are day by day out there trying to get people to see what's going on with the climate. It's stunning yesterday having a rainstorm with thunderstorms in January. That should say something, right? But most important than that is the future. The legislation just passed something about the electric vehicles. This is how much we're consuming right now on the red map. That's going to change dramatically once everybody's owning those electric vehicles. Where are we going to get the power? Whether you do the turbines, whether you do things like that ain't going to be sufficient enough, right? So starting with the management is great, but I hope that it's some knowledge into what you guys are doing for the future, because that skeleton that has to be built to support that, it would be a storage. That's how Europe gets run. I travel all over the world in South America and Europe. Europe, especially Germany. That's how they do with batteries. As the lady was just talking about that, right? But if the incentives are not there for people to change over, I mean, we can talk about a macro system, but I think it's better to talk about a micro system. I think it's going to be much more efficient. Solar farms are great, but it's an eyesore, nobody wants them. Wind power is great, but look at what happened with the Darwin Foundation in Galapagos Islands. So they create different vibrations and frequencies that kills other species. So we really need to be objective on the future and look more at what's going on. And yes, absolutely, whether it's public or private, it would be knowledge. I think that's what it would be. And definitely public, I think, is a little bit better than private, but as long as it's run efficiently. But nonetheless, talking about the future of what is it that we need to get the system up and running. As we all know, LIPA knows, the system in Long Island is the oldest one in the country. Can we take more energy to those cables? No, it has to be changed. And that's going to cost billions of dollars. Are we talking about reducing prices? No. The barrier is going to be in. The ratepayer has to know more about it because, believe me, I have a lot of customers that they don't even know whether or not PSEG is a public entity or not.
Right.
Nobody knows. People don't even know what they're paying on that bill. They don't know that 49% or 50% in a lot of instances for the delivery charge. And even worse, when people want to change over for renewable energy, there is a lot of problems with the towns and also, PSEG with the permits. They don't let it. You cannot produce more than 110% what you're already producing, but if the LIPA needs that energy, would allow the customers to do it and pay them so. I think that would be a great opportunity for not only cut costs, but be more efficient. Batteries are essential. That's the way of the future. Look at in California, the VPPs, the virtual power plants, is working. That should be implemented here, as the lady was saying. So all these things, I think committees, especially local committees, will help a lot to help you guys run a more efficient system with knowledge.
Thank you very much. Questions? Okay, Doug?
Yeah, so I think you bring up two important points, talking about where we're headed with all these lofty energy goals that we have. If we literally do nothing with the current system, it's possible we might be running into a situation where the consumption exceeds the generation, where literally we're going to have rolling brownouts, which I think no one wants. Now, while we're trying to tweak and fix and create a new system, that still could happen if this is left to the wayside. So I think you're right that we need to really be mindful that right now we're driving toward a brick wall, and if nothing changes, we have to change course a little bit. But I think you also bring up a good point, because you look at the 90s and the early 2000s before Sandy. I think the public wanted to know after Sandy and Irene what upgrades were made in the infrastructure, if any. Right. Now, again, we know that there were upgrades, but the public certainly didn't see them. And when you're looking at that, I think when PSEG Long Island took over, I think they were faced with something that was not a 2013 power grid necessarily, but having to make certain investments. And that's tough when you're a private entity working with a public entity. But again, now we're challenged because if there's a new public entity, is it going to be the same public entity? I think people will want to know that got us to where Sandy was. So I think you bring up a good point, upgrading the infrastructure, and it's not cheap to do it, but it's something that we need to do, especially if we're going to be, transitioning or driving electric cars and things of that nature.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Benny Torres and then Kevin Schrag. Mr. Torres.
Thank you, and I'm glad you guys are out here. I just recently found out about this, so I had to come here. One of the things, I am a local business owner in Hampton Bays. I do insurance and taxes, and I have a lot of clients that, and we all scream about the same thing, and electricity bill keeps getting higher and higher and higher. And I can recall I opened my business in 2010, and my rate, when I saw the electric bill, I didn't even pay it right away. It was so low during that time that I'd wait till the end of the year and then I'd pay it up in one shot. That's not the case today. Last year during the summer, for the first time, I actually paid about $600-700. My bill was $600-700. So I was like, whoa, I've never seen that before. So I'm seeing the impact of what's happening with, I don't know what you call this. It's almost, we're here talking about, I'm listening LIPA, PSE&G, and I'm trying to figure out, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, right? But the only issue when I'm saying Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde is which is which,
Yep.
all right? Is it LIPA or which one is which? Because I don't know. I can't tell. And I'm a consumer. So I have my business and I also am a homeowner. And I took my own proactive approach to electricity because, I used to joke around that I hated LIPA and I hated PSE&G, and I can't stand that I'm giving them, it's almost like they put a gun to my head and they're like, give me your money, and they're shaking me down. That's how I always felt. And my rates keep getting higher and higher and higher. And I'm trying to do a lot of these things, turning off the lights and changing to LED. I've done all that. My rates keep going high. I'm paying more and more money. So at one point we were paying about $400 and something a month for my home, and I'm like, wow, this is way too much. So I hooked up with my friend Jose Alvarez, and he sold me the solar panels, and so we finally installed the solar panels. But ironically, when we did the solar panels, they finished the installation. I also got the battery for that for my house as well. Ironically, it took about 2 to 3 weeks for LIPA or for PSE&G to flick the switch so I can start using the energy from the panels. So I still paid the same rates for those 2-3 weeks as I normally did. And I had panels. And I'm like, and it took a long time before the permits, and there's a lot of issues regarding, the whole permitting process and how long it takes. I think mine took about 6-7 months. I mean, for real, I want to do this thing. I've been trying to do this for a while, and finally it took 6-7 months. So we need to streamline that process, So, and that's one of the things that, I wanted to bring to you guys is, what it affects to us, So now I'm going to be producing my own energy. The only issue I have with, I know I'm going to overproduce because I'm changing everything in my house. So I'm doing the right thing. And my thing is that, so when I overproduce energy and it gets sent to the utilities, are they going to pay me what the utilities pay for their, what they pay for their electricity, and then send it to us? I'm sure they're not. I'm sure it's 1/10 of that, which is not fair because, if they're paying $1 a kilowatt, why can't they pay me $1 a kilowatt? So I don't think that's fair for me, right? Because I'm producing energy. So, and one of the things I had conversations with Councilman Bouvier a few times regarding these issues. And, why can't we do a cooperative in terms of, all the people who have solar panels in Hampton Bays, and why can't we sell collectively our energy as well and get paid for it? I think, why not? If we're overproducing, why shouldn't we get paid for it? So that's one of my things. The other issue is listening about what you guys are talking about, elections, right? And one of the things about elections that if you keep the current model of how we do elections, there's always people being left out. And I think one of the council members was talking earlier about the population of the East End, how much is grown. And a big part of that population on the East End really are Latinos who've moved in, who are working, hardworking. But there's a subsection, there's a class of Latinos too, who are here, who are workers. Their kids go to school, they pay taxes, they pay electricity as well, but they're not represented. Some of them a number of them are undocumented. So when we're talking about elections, are they going to have a voice? So I think there should be a model, maybe something different, nuance. I know there's that, buzzword about, undocumented illegals. We don't want them, to vote. And I'm saying, well, they paint your houses, they mow your lawns, they can do that, right? But why can't they vote as well? And just because you're undocumented, you can't vote in a regular general election or the primaries, why can't they vote in something to the effect of representation if you create a board? So that would be one of my things there. And there's got to be some inclusion because if you look at in the East End, Latinos are totally underrepresented. They have no voice, all right? And there are times that, Latinos go to other Hispanic elected officials in other districts to try to get help, and I don't think that's fair. So how can we put something together in order to help everybody? Because, yeah, you don't have a social, but you do pay electricity.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And, well, 2 points. One, when you started talking about LIPA, PSE&G Long Island, we heard about DPS Long Island, a veritable alphabet soup, right, of different agencies. And I think what you pointed out is exactly part of the problem when we talk about accountability. And, you talk to the public, but, what does LIPA do? What does PSE&G do? We've always had a third-party model. The decision was made after Superstorm Sandy. We still had a third-party model, but LIPA's reputation was tarnished, and they rebranded everything to PSE&G. Right. Their names on the trucks, like changing that changed something. So, when you've got, and then you've got DPS Long Island out there that doesn't have, just can make recommendations, but people don't know, and it's hard to hold agencies accountable when the public doesn't really know who does
well,
what.
One of the things recently, I thought I heard maybe 6 months ago that LIPA was coming back, and the hair on my back kind of stood up. I was like, oh, they are? I'm like, oh my God, you mean, we went from a bad model to a worse model. Are we going to go into a worser model if that exists? And
the second thing is just your point on making sure that the Latino community is represented, and that there's on the governmental level, I think there's a lot more everybody can do for inclusion there, as far as the electoral process. And as part of this, I know, one of the tasks that we had was to put together an advisory committee together, and we worked very hard to make sure that, there was a broad cross-section of the community that was, represented on, at least with this group when we meet with the advisory committee, which we'll be doing in early February. So, just really good points, and, from somebody who's trying to make a living, be a small business person out here, I really appreciate it.
And I have a lot of Latinos who are my clients, and and I get to hear their complaints. I called your office several times, and trying to help people as well. So
appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
I got a comment. Being a small business owner is hard. So thank you for everything that you do for this community here. And trust me when I say this, the immigrant community's voice will not be silenced, and they will have a voice at the table, all right?
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is Kevin Schrag.
Good afternoon. I just found out about this about an hour ago. Anyway, I'm an electrical contractor. I'm a signatory to Local 25 and a member of Long Island NECA. My son's a lineman, gets a Christmas gift, so. Anyway.
The appropriate gift for today.
Perfect. Perfect. That's right, guys. Anyway, my thoughts on the whole thing are, I believe that we should go back to a private company tightly managed by the DPS, like the old Wilco Public Service Commission. Because this way, when you have a private company and the state says something and kicks them in the ass, they got to get it done. All right? LIPA, I just think, has been really a failure. They assumed the Shoreham debt. It never went away, and it actually just got to be quite a bit more and stuff. And to fully municipalize it would just be a terrible mistake, because now nobody, they answer to nobody except themselves. Look at the MTA, look at NYCHA. You know, I'm not saying that that would be the outcome, but boy, you know, the odds sure are against it being, you know, working out. The other thing is, if you choose to stay with this hybrid system, which seems to be working pretty well, and as an electrical contractor, I can say to PSEG, they've got their lumps, you know, I mean, they're not perfect, but they get it done. What, you know, the LIPA board shouldn't have elections or anything else. What they should do is have utility professionals, people that ran things for Eversource or Pacific Gas and Electric or something else like that. The private sector, these are the guys that get it done. And they operate under the gun. They're supposed to turn a profit, otherwise their shareholders will fire them. Government doesn't quite seem to have that urgency about it, so to speak. You know, we'll get it done tomorrow or something else like that. And as I said, the MTA speaks volumes about the way I feel the New York State Authority pretty much, you know, fulfills its mission. And that's pretty much it, guys. That's all I had to say.
Hey, thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin.
Questions?
The only question, and as we're looking at this, I think kind of part of your point, if I'm interpreting it right, is you kind of want an agency that can take action. That if somebody screws up, they're fired. You know, is that something that you're looking at?
Well, Mr. Smith, that's exactly the way I feel that Lilco was. You know, if DPS comes in and, you know, decides that they screw something up terribly, and they, okay, hey, you guys are going to get fined $1 million. That's the end of it. That's the end of it.
Right.
You know, whereas a public authority,
That's everybody.
you know, what do you do? You know, I mean, like I said, look at the MTA.
And I think that's what we're trying to avoid, actually, or at least in my mind. I'm looking at it the similar way that you're looking at it. I know previous people have testified at other hearings have said that under the current system, and I think to your argument, but it's a little bit different. But under the current system, PSEG failed to act under Isaias. Then we see the contract being renegotiated. That's not really the same kind of action. So like you said, it should be one or the other, but it should work, you know, effective.
The model that you have now, PSEG is kind of riding two horses.
Right.
They run the system, but they don't own it.
Right.
You know, you look at the Bell telephone system of the 60s and 70s. They designed it, they built it, they ran it. I mean, it got done, you know, because they had ownership in it. PSEG has no ownership in this. They have very strong incentives, financial incentives to do well. But if you don't own the system, you know, it's like a rented car. Take it out, beat it to death, and then bring it back. Oh, I don't know what happened to it, you know, so that's, you know, it's kind of...
I think your points are very well taken.
Okay, everybody, thank you
Hey,
so
thank
much
you.
for your time.
Thank you. That is our last card of people signing up to speak. Is there anybody out there who didn't sign a card or hasn't spoken yet who would like to speak? Seeing no hands. First of all, I want to thank all of you that came today and all of you that testified. We've had, you know, very robust and very informative hearings, and today was no exception. You did the East End proud. I'm glad we scheduled this extra hearing so that all of you could be heard. I want to thank my colleagues who traveled from farther distances, except for Mr. Palumbo, who had only come from the North Fork. But it's these kinds of days where my colleagues learn why they call this Long Island. So I appreciate them all being here today. You know, this really concludes our first round of hearings. The next step in this process is the production of a draft report, which we hope will get done, Rory, sometime in the next month and a half or so.
So we have the advisory committee meeting on February 3rd. I encourage the commissioners to attend. The co-chairs have already committed, but if you are able to come, you should. You'll get additional information on that. We are shooting for a draft report mid to later February, and we are absolutely committed to working this process as vigorously as possible so that we can get the legislature, we can get you to get the legislature a final report with time to act on it this session.
Right. And after the draft report, there will be another round of public hearings, so you'll have the opportunity to access this process again.
No, 2 weeks.
Senator?
I want to thank everyone for testifying. Again, fifth hearing, we're getting a lot of feedback as to the direction we should be going at, and looking forward to the report from the advisory committee and hearing from more of you in our next set of hearings. Thank you once again.
Thank you, everybody. This hearing is closed.
Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.
I'll see you next week.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.